Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Happy Friday. Welcome to the weekend. Thanks for checking out a special mini-cast episode of The Lager Line, as always served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm your host, Ben DuBose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. As we chat this Friday, February 28th, the Rockets are finally, for the first time in more than a month, more than 2 months actually, back to full health. Jabari Smith Jr. came back from his hand injury after the All-Star break, and now, this Saturday, Fred VanVleet will be back from the right ankle strain that he suffered in the first game of February. So for the first time, the Rockets are whole, and they are going back to the lineup that was established during that stretch of ball in January when they had some of their best wins, 2 against the Grizzlies, 2 against the Cavs, 1 on the road against the Celtics that everyone remembers, with Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet in the backcourt, Dillon, Brooks, and then Thompson as your forwards, and Alperen Sengun at center. Ime Udoka was waiting until everyone came back to announce his starting lineup for the home stretch of this season. I understand why he didn't want to say it prematurely, because you don't want guys focused on things beyond the task in front of them. But now with Fred coming back, as of this Saturday, the home game against the Kings, we know what the Rockets are planning to do down the home stretch of this season. Ime said there could be some variance, and certainly on back-to-backs, it could be that one or more of your veterans needs a game off. So especially with guys like Fred that are just coming off the injured list, or the NBA's version of an injured list, I don't think they want to write this in stone as saying this is for sure the way it's going to be every game the rest of the way. But I think we now know, as expected, that this is the plan, that this is what the Rockets, assuming health, assuming availability, want to do. And if for some reason things go into a tailspin, the results aren't what they anticipate, then of course they have the right to revisit this down the line. But I think it's pretty clear that this is the group the Rockets want to sink or swim with down the home stretch of this season. And when you're within 6 weeks of the playoffs, because Saturday is the start of March, so you're only about 6 weeks out from when the playoffs begin in April, you want to have a group that's consistent in your starting five so you can begin building chemistry. That's one thing the Rockets, ever since the calendar turned to 2025, have not been able to have much of because of the injuries, because of the constant in and outs of the rotation and the lineup, because of all the back-to-backs. They haven't had the same group. They haven't had much practice time. Now you're getting back to health. The schedule is a bit more spaced out. And so you do want to build a little bit more chemistry down the home stretch of the year. And so I think it's important to Ime Udoka to be able to have a fairly consistent lineup and rotation, as consistent as it can be, so that those guys can start the process of, it's not starting from scratch because they have had some time together this season, but really try and hone in on what makes them great and putting each player in the best position to succeed. And so Friday's practice was the first one in which Fred was a full participant. Rockets announced that, as expected, he will be in the starting lineup on Saturday. And so with that, Ime more or less declared his starting lineup for the remainder of this year, with Ime and Dillon at the forward spots and Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason both coming off the bench. Jabari, prior to the All-Star break, in his 3 NBA seasons to date, had never come off the bench a single time. He's showing a lot of maturity, in my opinion, handling this very gracefully and trying to make the best of the situation. He will still play a lot. The Rockets frequently say it's not about who starts, it's about who finishes, and that may vary from game to game, matchup to matchup. But there is some cachet, some pedigree, some intrinsic value to being a starter. And so I think ultimately, even though they're going to hype up this idea that it's about the closing lineup, they also want to put themselves in the best position to build leads and not have to come back in the fourth quarters. And so hopefully that means your starters going out and excelling in the first and third quarters of games so that you're playing from in front. And ultimately, this is the group that Ime Udoka thinks gives the Rockets the best chance to do that. And so in this special mini episode, no Paolo, I'm just doing this. Actually just got home from today's midday practice on Friday. I just want to give you guys a little bit of, my reading of the tea leaves, also some conversations I've had behind the scenes and what Ime Udoka told us today in his media availability, but more or less just my interpretation based on a few factors of why the Rockets went in this direction and what the implications are down the home stretch of this season. The Rockets are in a really good spot when it comes to their position in the standings and, by extension, what they can potentially accomplish the remainder of this season. I know it got hairy earlier in the month when they had that 6-game losing streak and it looked like they were on fumes and they had all the injuries. But now not only are they healthy, but they've won 5 of their last 7 games. They swept the home back-to-back against the Bucks and the Spurs. Defensively, they got back to their roots against the Bucks, held them to just 12 points in the fourth quarter. I know the offensive execution wasn't always great, but look, you hold a team with Giannis and Dame to 12 points in the fourth quarter. That is the identity of the Rockets before the injuries, when they were consistently the second or third best defense in the league. To see that on the big stage against a marquee opponent, it shows you that is still in them somewhere. Obviously, the challengers on the players and the coaching staff to bring that out much more consistently, and hopefully that's going to happen now that they're back to full health. But it was good just from a morale standpoint for them to show the NBA and to show themselves that they still have that in them. But I think when you look at what they've been able to do, 3-1 since the All-Star break, the only loss, that frustrating one where they got out-rebounded by 17 in Utah, and then they responded immediately and not only beat the Bucks and Spurs, but beat them up. Were plus 16 and plus 19 on the glass in their next 2 games, showing that what happened against the Jazz was indeed an outlier. Night 2 of a back-to-back. No Tari Eason, got into their hotel at like 4 a.m. local time the morning of the game. Those types of factors. So by and large, they have really improved their position. I know they're still in a virtual tie with the Lakers for the 4th seed in the West, because the Lakers, they've won 4 straight games, and ever since adding Luka, as expected, they've been a much better team. But the Rockets are tightening the gap on the teams at 2 and 3, and they are really starting, most importantly, to build some real separation from teams in the play-in range. So right after beating the Bucks, Milwaukee turned around and beat Denver on Thursday night. So the Rockets are only a game back of Denver for the 3 seed, and the Rockets are 1-0 against Denver, so they're in a pretty decent position to potentially win the tiebreaker there. Rockets are only a game and a half back of Memphis at number 2. Rockets have already won the tiebreaker by beating Memphis 3 or 4 times this season. And then you look at the teams below the Rockets. The Clippers are at 6. That's not the play-in tournament. That's still a direct qualifier. They're at 26 losses. So that's 4 games of separation. When you look at the teams actually in the play-in range, you've got the Warriors at 27 losses and the Timberwolves, Mavericks, and Kings all at 28 losses. So the Rockets will enter March with a buffer of at least 5 games, and in most cases 6 in the loss column, over teams in the play-in range. So while not a guarantee, they certainly have not mathematically clinched. They are in an extremely strong position, I would say 80% plus, to directly qualify for the playoffs without having to go through the play-in tournament, and thus get at least one best-of-7 series, and ultimately, probably better than 50-50 now, to get home court advantage in at least one round. Because you've got 4 teams between 2 and 5, the Grizzlies, the Nuggets, the Lakers, and the Rockets. All Houston has to do is outplay one of those 3 other teams, and they're going to be in the top 4 by default. And the Rockets have an easier schedule than all of those 3. And for all the talk about the Rockets being weaker on back-to-backs, there's only 2 of those left. So I think the odds are pretty good. Grizzlies at 20 losses, the Nuggets and Lakers at 21, the Rockets at 22. I think the odds are pretty good that Houston's going to be able to pass at least one of those 3 teams, especially when you consider they're in good tiebreaker position. They're 1-0 against the Lakers and Nuggets. They've already won the tiebreaker against Memphis. And then as far as anybody catching the Rockets, again, they've built some real separation in terms of, the 4 games over the Clippers at 6, the 5+ over teams in the play-in range. So while it hasn't necessarily shown itself yet in the standings, in that the Rockets are still on that 4-5 line the way they've been for a lot of February, the fact that they've won 5 of 7 games is allowing them to build separation from other teams in the West and gain a little bit on teams like the Grizzlies and the Nuggets since the All-Star break, to where there's a ton to play for. It's not a guarantee, but it's pretty damn close that the Rockets are going to be playing true playoff games at Toyota Center for the first time in 6 years. I mean, they haven't been in the playoffs in 2020, but that was the COVID bubble. They haven't had a home playoff game at Toyota Center since that deflating Game 6 loss to the Warriors without Steph Curry in May of 2019. It has been a long time. And I bring that up to say, opportunity is not a lengthy visitor. You can't assume that you are going to be in this position every single year. Things happen in the NBA. Fortunes can change on a dime. Just look what's happening to Kevin Durant and Devin Booker with the Suns. They're 5 games under 500 and likely to miss the playoffs altogether, which, it's great that the Rockets will likely get a lottery pick this year out of that based on that draft deal from last offseason with the Nets, giving Brooklyn back their picks for effectively shorting the Suns in future years. But more importantly, I think that shows you how fragile life in the NBA is, even when you think you're in a really good position. So with the Rockets right now, and you look back at, the wilderness they've been in to start this decade, you can't just treat this as house money. If you are able to get in, especially the top half of a loaded Western Conference bracket, the West is so much better than the East. You have an opportunity. Not going to say the Rockets should expect to win a championship or think they will, but it's not nothing. And so with an opportunity this precious, again, this is going to be the first playoff basketball in Houston in 6 years. They're taking these games down the home stretch of the season very seriously, and they're taking decisions about the lineup and the rotation very seriously because they want to be able to give themselves the best possibility to win games. And who knows? I mean, maybe if the Lakers are on the 4-5 line and Luka and LeBron go crazy against the Thunder, maybe OKC, I know they look like a juggernaut, but maybe OKC ends up getting knocked out, and all of a sudden the pathway is there for the Rockets to do something special, like we saw at times with this lineup in January when Ime started going off and looked like a star. So that's where I want to start our discussion, by reiterating where the Rockets are in the standings and why they're not just looking at this through the lens of development. I'm sure there are some that will see a veteran like Dillon Brooks starting ahead of guys like Jabari Smith and Tari Eason, the third-year forwards who will come off the bench, and say, why don't the Rockets get more information and give the most runway to all their young guys? I mean, to a large extent, they're doing that, but they also want to win. This is a rare opportunity. If you are going to qualify for the playoffs in a loaded West without having to go through the play-in tournament, in all likelihood, you can't just assume that you're going to continually get these opportunities. They want to give themselves the best possible opportunity, and so they want to take advantage of every single margin. So I state that off at the top before we go into the analysis, because I'm sure some will say, look, the Rockets aren't a true contender this year. Why can't it be about the young guys? For the most part, it is. Again, it's still a very young rotation, but when you're this close to the playoffs, just 6 weeks away, and you're in a really strong position, let's talk about the here and now. We can look at all the developmental factors this offseason, and there will be plenty of time for that in the future. Most of the young guys are all under contractual control for some time. So I think that's the way Ime Udoka and this staff is looking at it. For those that are wondering about the developmental factors, it's March, and the playoffs are basically a little more than a month away. It's about the here and now, and that's where Ime Udoka started this process in terms of deciding his starting lineup the rest of the way. And I'll keep it short and simple with Ime Thompson. That was a no-brainer. Ime Thompson is the best player on this team when it comes to two-way production. The impact he makes on ball, off ball, offensively, already being one of the most dynamic and versatile defensive players in the league. The best version of the Rockets includes playing Ime Thompson true starters minutes, which means 36 plus per night. And he's not going to get there if you bring him off the bench, because if you bring him off the bench, we've talked about it, myself and Paolo Alves, my usual co-host, Amen's not going to play 18 consecutive minutes. No NBA player is if you're trying to seriously get the best version out of them because they're probably going to wear down. And that's the only way he can play 36 minutes if you're bringing him in midway through the first and third quarters. And if you're bringing him in at, the 9 or 10 minute mark, then why the hell wouldn't you just start him? That doesn't make any sense. So players need breaks in each half to get the best versions out of them. And if Ime is going to play 36 minutes, it's just not going to happen if you're bringing him off the bench, because he's not going to play 18 minutes straight in each half. And the best version of the Rockets includes playing Ime Thompson as many minutes as he can reasonably handle. Ime was going to start when he did what he did in January on both ends of the court and showed that it wasn't just about playing against backups, that his production would extrapolate against the best of the best. It was a no-brainer. He was staying in. We've talked about the reasons before. It was just a matter of who he would start in place of. And you look at the other four spots, Fred, Jalen, and Sengun all bring something that is irreplaceable. With Fred, and we've seen it in his absence in February, it's not just the point guard skills and the three-point shooting, though those are important. It's also the leadership, the intangibles, the organization. He is so important on both ends of the court to getting this team producing and playing as a unit. Jabari said that. I asked him at Friday's practice, and he said the biggest value of Fred is in control of the offense, because as we saw in January, and to quote Jabari, or as we saw in February, things get hectic without Fred. They get sped up. This is a team that outside of Fred and Dillon does not have a lot of experience on the big stage. And as the games get more meaningful, you need Fred's presence. You just do. And that's before we talk about his floor spacing and his passing and all the things that he brings from a basketball standpoint. It's more the leadership, the intangibles, the culture. Fred is going to be out there. He's paid at a max level for a reason. Alperen Sengun is an all-star. He's clearly the best big man on this team. And Jalen Green is the leading scorer, someone that's gotten a lot more consistent and can generate offense in sticky half-court situations from the perimeter. He's not the consistent A1 just yet. He's been much more consistent than he was. He's not quite to that Donovan Mitchell, Devin Booker tier that we want him to be at, the true tip of the spear, but he's getting a lot closer. And so with that, his spot as the leading scorer for a team that's top 4 in the West is pretty secure. So amongst your clear top 7, you've got 4 in Ime because he's the best player, and Fred, Sengun, and Jalen because they have unique skills that aren't replicated anywhere else that you basically have to start. So that leaves you 3 guys for 1 spot: Dillon Brooks, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason. I know Paolo the other night made the case for potentially starting Tari alongside Ime, and they do have some synergies from the whole Terror Twins dynamic off the bench. But I think it's pretty simple why the Rockets didn't start Tari, and it comes down to availability. Look, the Rockets are very high on Tari as a prospect, and it's entirely possible that in the future he becomes a starting level player or an actual starter for this team. But right now, he's still not even cleared to play on both ends of back-to-backs. And we're barely more than a month removed from when he missed, I think, 13, 14 consecutive games with that lower leg issue, which now goes back multiple seasons. I hope he puts it behind him. I think he can. I hope he gets back to the healthy version that played all 82 games as a rookie. But it's March. The Rockets are not going to blindly trust that Tari is going to be out there on an every game basis. And that's the point of putting together a consistent starting lineup. It's the opportunity to build chemistry from that consistency. Benches are going to be inherently unstable in the NBA because nobody has a clear-cut top 10. It just doesn't work that way from a talent perspective. Everything's going to be sort of situational, matchups, who has the hot hand. So in terms of your secondary units, there's going to be a lot of volatility throughout the year. You might have a consistent 6th or even 7th man, but you're not going to have a consistent backup 4 or backup 5. And so because of that, it's the starting lineup. That's the only spot where you can truly build cohesion to where guys can get used to not just, how they want to play themselves, but how they can best function alongside four other players and put them all in the best positions to succeed, to put them all in the right spots on the court to give them the best opportunities to collectively score or defend at a high level. And so, as good as Tari is, the Rockets don't want to chance him being unavailable, which we already know he would be for the last two back-to-backs, half of those, because then you're having to change your lineup frequently. And so the opportunity to actually build chemistry within the starting five isn't going to be there if you're inherently changing the starting five. Because it's not just about that one spot. Is it Tari? Is it Jabari? Is it Dillon? No, it's also about the other four guys and building a routine playing next to one another. So I think with Tari, that's why he was scratched. I understand basketball-wise, and Paolo did a good job in our pod earlier this week laying out the case for why you should consider that. But just from a practical standpoint, it just wasn't realistic to think the Rockets would trust Tari's consistent availability to that extent this season, considering the time he's already missed, considering the back-to-back limitations already there, considering what happened last season. I think it's possible that Tari, the Rockets organizationally certainly view him as a starting level player and perhaps more than that. And so in years ahead, there's an opportunity for him to be a starter for this team. And you can make a basketball case that he's already one of the five best. But I just don't think the trust is there quite yet when it comes to his availability, the durability for the Rockets to put him in that five-man unit that they want to be as consistent, as regular as possible so that they can build chemistry. So I think Tari was the easy choice as far as leaving out. And so that leaves you two guys for one spot, Dillon Brooks and Jabari Smith Jr. I went back and forth on this myself. I made the case the other night for potentially having Dillon as, a six-man where you can give him 25 minutes and 6 fouls and turn him loose. And if there's some wearing down, which it feels like in both the last two seasons there has been defensively, you let him, manage his body a little more by capping his minutes. The same reason why, you're not capping a men's minutes by starting him. Whoever you bring off the bench, you are probably capping them in the 25 to 30-minute range, assuming there's no crazy foul trouble or something like that. I think you can still make a solid case to start Jabari over Dillon based on those reasons. But I think the reason Dillon got the nod is about the collective. Some will say Dillon's the veteran. He's 29, Jabari's 21, and simplify it to Ime just trusting the veteran more. There might be some of that, but I really don't think it's that, at least not predominantly. I think in some ways it would have been easier to bench Dillon. He's already got his 4-year contract worth like $85 million. He's contractually secured. Jabari is not. Jabari's playing for a potential contract extension this summer. He hasn't gotten his first big deal. He's a guy who was drafted number 3 overall. Most people thought he'd be number 1 overall in 2022. And as of a week ago, he had not come off the bench a single time in 3 NBA seasons. In fact, he's been in Houston a year longer than Dillon. So I give Jabari a ton of credit for being willing to come off the bench, and I don't think it was easy for Ime Udoka, Rafael Stone, and the Rockets to have these conversations with Jabari to sell him on this role. As much as they say it's not about who starts, it's about who finishes. No, there is some pedigree to being in the starting lineup. It can certainly help you in terms of contract negotiations because you get more counting stats and so on and so forth. I don't think it was easy for the Rockets to move Jabari to this bench role. And in some ways, it might have been easier to bench Dillon, even though he is a veteran, because he's more secure in his status and his style of play and who he is. With Jabari, who's 21, yeah, there's still a lot of untapped potential in my eyes. And so I don't think, there might be a slight factor to wanting to surround Amin, Şengün, and Jalen, 3 really young guys in your starting lineup with 2 veterans. But I think it's more about just stylistic preferences. I think Jabari would have made you probably a better defensive team based on the additional length, the size, the extra rebounding, because we know where the Rockets really slip defensively is when they don't rebound the ball well, when teams like the Jazz last weekend get second chance opportunities. Even if your initial defense is good, there's a whole cascading effect when it comes to you not being able to prevent second possessions, and it's very easy for the team to get demoralized over 48 minutes. And so I think that's something to watch with the Rockets being a little smaller without starting Jabari. There's not one position in the starting five where they're clearly above average when it comes to height. And so I talked about this with Ime the other night. It's going to put a lot of pressure on your wings, guys like Jalen, Dillon, Ime, Tari, to rebound, because a lot of times you're going to need Şengün just to sort of try and keep the primary big off the glass. And so you're going to need your wings and your guards to get those longer rebounds, use their athleticism in ways that perhaps over 82 games are hard to do because they'll wear down. And especially in the stretch of the schedule where the team is shorthanded and there's a ton of back-to-backs, it's not realistic. But now down the home stretch of the year, fewer back-to-backs, team is healthier, so nobody should be super overextended minutes-wise, and there's more adrenaline because the games are way more important. Maybe this formula can work. And so what would look on paper like a rebounding deficiency without the size of Jabari Smith Jr., maybe it won't be quite as much, because down the home stretch of the year, and then you get into the playoffs where games are more spaced out in the first round. Rockets are now 14-2 this season in games with 2 or more days of rest, which in the first round you have a decent bit of because the series are so spaced out, with the NBA trying to maximize national TV opportunities for all 8 of its series. That could be a small factor as well, that the Rockets are able to trust these guards and wings down the stretch of the year to help out with rebounding now that the games are more important and more spaced out in ways that they couldn't throughout the season. But I think the 2 biggest factors, number one, there already is a month of chemistry that was developed with this starting 5, Fred, Jalen, Dillon, Ime, and Şengün. They played next to one another during that brilliant stretch of January where Ime Udoka won Coach of the Month and the Rockets had some of their best wins, 2 over the Grizzlies, 2 over the Cavs, and the memorable one that Ime won at the buzzer in Boston. That was perhaps the best stretch of basketball the Rockets have had this decade, and it was with those 5 guys. Jabari has not functioned in a starting lineup next to the quartet of Fred, Jalen, Ime, and Şengün. Not saying he wouldn't have been able to, but when it comes to the concept of building chemistry, the Dillon group had a month head start. And when you only have a month to 6 weeks left before the playoffs, being able to double your sample is potentially meaningful. And so I think that month of January and the fact that starting Jabari would have basically been a brand new starting 5, I think that was a factor. I also think that when you look at how Ime, and again, this is all about Ime, the biggest reason for the change, it's not a shot at Jabari, it's not a shot at anybody. Amen's just the best player on this team. But the way Ime is especially used when Fred VanVleet is back, he functions offensively as something of a quasi-big. He'll probably get a few more on-ball reps because, I do think he got better with his so-called point guard skills during the month of February when he had to slide to that position when Fred was out. But by and large, it's still going to be Fred and Jalen initiating the majority of sets for the Rockets. And so you see Ime functioning often out of the dunker slots and making these backdoor cuts the way he's most effective with his elite athleticism and shooting limitations. I mean, he's gotten better as a shooter this year, but he's still below average, clearly. So Ime functions as a quasi-big, and Şengün is a prototype big. Jabari is much more of a big than Dillon Brooks. I would call him a stretch big because certainly Jabari is someone that you can trust from 3-point range, but he's still a big. Jabari is not particularly shifty. He's not someone that can really, he can shoot over guys in the mid post, but you're not really going to give Jabari the ball behind the 3-point line and say, go get a bucket one-on-one. Dillon Brooks, primarily, we think of him as a shooter, and, part of the argument for Jabari, I mentioned earlier this week that Dillon was at 38%, and that was a little bit ahead of his career long marks. So maybe, Jabari at 35, 36%, Dillon at closer to 40 most of this year. Maybe Dillon is due to regress. Well, Dillon shot the lights out against the Bucks and the Spurs, and now he's at almost 40%. So it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Credit to Dillon for doing continued work and having his best year as a shooter in his NBA career. I think that's certainly part of it. But more than that, he's also got a little more wiggle to his game. It's not a huge part of his game. Like, nobody's ever going to expect Dillon to go out and score 20-plus points per game. But he can help the Rockets out of sticky situations in the half court. He can do a little bit of self-creation and generating his own offense. He functions, the bottom line, as a perimeter player. And the Rockets are used to, as are most NBA teams, functioning with at least 3 perimeter players on the floor, which they will with Fred, Jalen, and Dillon. If you started Jabari in place of Dillon, you would be more or less functioning, especially with Fred back at point guard, with 2 perimeter players and 3 bigs, with Ime, Jabari, and Şengün. And again, it's not that you couldn't overcome it. Ime is certainly not a big only. There's some versatility to his game. And I think, especially if it was training camp, I think the Rockets might come to a different conclusion because you'd have 82 games to work this out. And also the rebounding issues that come from being a little bit smaller, you're probably not going to be able to sustain that over 82 games. But with just, 20 or so games left in the final 4 to 6 weeks before the playoffs, the Dillon and Ime forward version of the Rockets already having a month's worth of experience, and the Rockets having an entire season, really 2 seasons, ever since Ime Udoka took the job in the 2023 offseason, they functioned with at least 3 perimeter players. You'd be better defensively with Jabari in place of Dillon Brooks. Of course, Dillon's still a very good defensive player, but just overall, Jabari a good defensive player, but superior rebounding. I think it's clear the data shows it that the Rockets will probably be better defensively with Jabari in the starting lineup. But I think offensively, it's a pretty big change to have Fred and Jalen be the only true perimeter players that are out there in your starting 5. The spacing could get a little bit clunky. And it's just not the time of year to start from scratch, to experiment with something that conceptually is brand new. Every game counts. And so that's why I think the Rockets made this decision. I don't think it's necessarily the way the Rockets will start next season. I think if you have a full 6 months, 82 games, and you're starting anew in training camp, the Rockets might come to a different conclusion. If they have more runway to sort of iron out the kinks from, again, it's not all bad. There's advantages to being bigger. There's advantages to being even more versatile defensively. But right now, you want to stick with what you know, what players they're familiar with, not just the players individually, but the collective. And philosophically, the version of the Rockets starting Fred, Jalen, Ime, Dillon, and Şengün, it's just philosophically more in line with the way most players on this roster are used to playing than the version with Fred, Jalen, Ime, Jabari, and Şengün. To me, that's the bottom line. You could make a case in a vacuum for Jabari over Dillon. You can make a case for Tari over both of them. But I just think when you look at the time of the year and you look at the collective, you don't have a lot of time to start playing a different way. You don't have a lot of time to change your lineups more if Tari goes out again. You want to stick with what you know at this point of the season. And I think that's where Dillon got the heads up or the leg up. It's not so much that he's a veteran. It's more just philosophically how the Rockets have played and how starting Tari or especially Jabari would potentially change that in a way that 4 to 6 weeks before the playoffs just probably doesn't make the most sense for the group. Now, that's not to say that Tari and Jabari won't still be important, because they will, and there may be games. One benefit to bringing Jabari off the bench, you'll be able to use him as a backup 5 even more. And so there may be games where Jabari is in the closing lineup ahead of Alperen Şengün because it's a tough matchup for Alpi defensively. There may be games, as we've seen at times in the last 2 years, where Tari finishes games ahead of Jalen Green because Tari is bigger defensively, and especially if Jalen is cold or not getting a friendly whistle and you need a little bit more size, a little more rebounding, Tari may play instead of Jalen to finish some games. So what the Rockets are saying in terms of the closing lineups matter more than the starting lineup, that's true. And there's still a pathway for both Tari and Jabari to be a part of those closing lineups. The Rockets will play the hot hands. That's the way Ime Udoka has always done it. But in terms of the starting lineup and how we got here, I just think it was pretty clearly the Rockets wanting to give the collective the best chance to build chemistry. And Dillon, he fits with philosophically how they played. He's generally been very available. His production, it ebbs and flows a little bit, as do most players. but he does take care of his body. He's out there frequently. And I just think the one opportunity with your starting five, what's different than bench units, is that you are able potentially to build some consistency to where guys get used to playing with those other four guys and being used to, in those minutes, playing in certain ways. Rockets already have a head start with the Dillon unit relative to an alternative to Jabari or Tari. It's late in the year. And it's not like the potential upgrade would have been so clear cut that you say, you know what, I'm going to toss the pre-existing experience, the style of play, consistency, those factors aside. You can make a case for Jabari or Tari, but it's not so clear cut. And I think at this point in the year, they would need something clear cut to make a change of that magnitude. So I think with Dillon and Ime, this is the group the Rockets had when they were arguably at their best in January. Maybe the rebounding will pick up even more now that, there are fewer back-to-backs, healthier roster. Team doesn't have to conserve its legs as much. That's the hope, and we'll see how it plays out over the remainder of this season, starting Saturday night against the Kings. All right, that'll do it for this mini episode. Just wanted to give a few thoughts on why the Rockets made the decision that they did, and hopefully it starts working out. We'll see against the Kings. Rockets are 0-2 against Sacramento this year, but both those losses were in Sacramento. This one in Houston. Rockets have been very good at home this year, 20-9, and as mentioned, they're 14-2 in games with at least 2 days of rest, which they will have since they have not played since Wednesday night. Anyway, that'll do it for this one, and until our next episode, we'll have a full show next week with myself and Paolo. Best place to get insight is on Twitter. I'm on there at Ben DuBose. Paolo's on there at Paolo Alves NBA, and the show is on there at the Logger Line, where if you go to that page, certainly you can get all of our content, but you have the link tree in the bio, Apple, Google, Spotify. You can hit up all our podcast distributors, subscribe, leave a 5-star review if you haven't already. But also you can find links to our friends, sponsors, partners of the program, Sports Talk 790, Carbach Brewing, USA Today's Rockets Wire. If you would consume their content and show some love from us, then that'll keep us looking good to those partners and hopefully keep us running as one of the most active podcasts covering Houston Rockets basketball. As always, it needs to make business sense. Anyway, plugs complete. We'll adjourn for now. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the start of March. And we'll be back soon with another full episode of The Logger Line. Go Rockets.